All right, everybody. So today we have Dr. Brandon Roberts. How are you?
Doing well, Dave. How are you doing?
Doing good. Long day at the office today. Literally, like just came home. Haven't eaten yet, but so I'll be getting hungry.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I think my dinner's cooking now.
So for people, I mean, like I was just saying, I've seen your name a lot, like for years now, and I've seen you on different podcasts, but we never really connected until recently. So for people who don't know, what is your background in this space?
Yeah, so I have a bit of a diverse background, I like to think, at least. So I have bachelor's, master's, and PhD from the University of Florida. I was originally doing like molecular biology, and then I found exercise science, and I was like, oh, I can combine those. And so
Yeah.
my PhD was in muscle biology, but more on the muscle wasting side, so like cancer, disuse, things like that. And so, that was 4 or 5 years ago. But I realized like I- that's really important, and I'm happy a lot of people are studying it, but that's just not what I wanted to study.
Yeah.
So I switched over and did a postdoc in resistance training and clinical trials, and still keeping the muscle theme basically. Um, and I did that for a few years, and then kind of bounced around, done a lot of different stuff since then. So yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
pretty
it's
stable.
interesting. Do you know Miguel Blacut?
Yes, yeah, I've talked to him.
And
Yeah.
I feel like he kind of said almost like he went the opposite way, where he was, into the exercise science and all of that. And then he felt like it was more important for him to do. I don't know exactly what he's doing now. Something with neuroscience, I believe, like maybe degenerative diseases. I probably mixed that up a little bit, but yeah, kind of the opposite way there. But it is interesting. I mean, I studied exercise science in college, but I always knew like I was either going to med or dental school. So it wasn't really like I don't know if I would have chosen it if I didn't have future plans. It was more like, okay, I could choose any major as long as I had my prerequisite classes. And I obviously enjoyed it, but it was already a passion of mine, well before that. But in this space, I'd say, there's quite a lot of people who have that, at least as an undergrad. You obviously took that further and further. So
Yeah, yeah, and I've mentored a lot of exercise science students who have done like different things, and
mhm.
it's a great major for like you know pre-professional school, like pick your school. That's great.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So one of the things I had seen you posting quite a bit on recently is ashwagandha.
Mhm.
And that is a supplement that I've taken at least 5 years, not all the time. But it's funny. It's like one of those ones where the research, I'm kind of convinced by the research, and then I never feel anything from it. But there are other supplements I don't necessarily feel, like fish oil, that I feel like is worth having in there. And so oftentimes I'll say, okay, I'm taking too many supplements, and I'm not. It's funny. Like I've always been, I wouldn't say anti-supplement. I just never thought supplements were that worth it. But
Mhm.
that's more from like a bodybuilding standpoint. I don't think they're like super valuable, but from a health standpoint, there's a few that I actually do think are worth including. And so ashwagandha was one where I'm like, it's kind of like B level, or at least it was in my mind. And I would say I'm going to stop taking it. And then I just kind of run through the research again. And say, well, science does this, and there's some research to show this and this and this. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to leave it in. And that's happened a few times now. So, what are some of the variables for that you have studied or that you've been reviewing?
Yeah, so I was kind of curious about it. I've tangentially heard of it over the past 5 or 6 years, and I was like, okay, enough is enough. It's not in my supplement stack, and I'm not a huge supplement person either. But let's like dig into the 10 good papers there are on it and see what the data says. And pretty much, the strongest effect is for like anti-anxiety or
Mhm.
anti-stress. Like that's if there's one thing it does that. I don't know if you gave it a percentage base, I would say like 10 to 20%, somewhere in there.
Mhm.
But that is one of the more reported effects across like um, all people with chronic stress, people, normal healthy people, like people exercising, doesn't really matter. Usually it helps with stress.
You were saying a 10 to 20% reduction in stress.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So that's, if I had to ballpark it, that's probably what I would say you would get by taking it if it helped you. So the other kind of benefits that I saw and have, I'm kind of still on the fence on a lot of them. So the performance benefits, I'm really on the fence on, but it seems like it can increase like your VO2 max, your endurance.
Mhm.
There's 2 or 3 studies on that, and it ranges from like untrained people to I wouldn't call them elite, but I'll call them like good weekend warriors.
Yeah.
Looking at the VO2 maxes. And then I think there was one study with resistance training, and it just like strength, testosterone increased, recovery was better, like they had less DOMs, it was just like across the board, everything that I really care about was better.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, I have to at least try it. So I've been taking it for probably 2 or 3 months now.
At what dose?
Let's see, like 600 mgs a day split across 2 doses.
Okay.
Yeah, so like 300 in the morning, 300 in the evening. And that's one of the areas that the research, it's almost always split across a day, or it seems like it, the way it's written, it's split that way.
Yeah.
But it's not super clear either. So like if I had to say, an ideal time to try to take it, definitely with a meal. Because I don't know have you ever taken it on an empty stomach?
Yeah, quite often, I would say.
Yeah. Does it affect you? It like messes my stomach up. I don't know
Really?
why. Yeah.
No, and I usually have. I mean, it's weird. So I have like some GI issues, but it's not like standard things. Like a lot of things that will mess somebody up. That's not my typical experience. But no, I can't say it's ever messed me up.
Okay. So I've heard both sides, but generally with meals is how it's recommended to take. So yeah, like I did basically on Instagram, I'll do like a week of content on something, and I chose ashwagandha for that week. And it's just, the more I look back at the data, the more I'm like, well, if it doesn't have any contraindications, at least for a couple months, or anything that I've seen to be worried about, then it's probably worth at least trying. So I tried it for a while, and I think it helped, but then I stopped, and I haven't noticed anything since I've stopped. And I'm like,
right.
Well, maybe it didn't do anything.
Yeah, I have that happen a lot. I mean, it's so hard, obviously, with like an N=1, right? I mean, you never know. I want to circle back to a few of those things. So I currently I used to take it 3 times a day because that's what I saw recommended. But that was just based on like what the supplements said, and then I actually looked into it. Like you said, a lot of the research actually uses 2 times a day. So I do, I don't know the exact, it's probably 450 to 500 milligrams twice a day. So a little bit higher. And I used to do 3, and I was like, it's really annoying. Like taking it when you wake up and before you go to sleep, just for supplements in general, I try to break it up into 2. Anything that I have to take 3 times a day, I'm like, this is just starting to get irritating. But I can't say I noticed really anything, but I'd like to think it helps. You said VO2 max, you were saying from untrained to, not elite, but like, athletic, let's say. Have you looked into like VO2 max research in general much?
Yeah, I mean, so I've done some VO2 max. It's just like a standard protocol that most exercise scientists should be able to run in general.
Have you tested your own?
Yes. So that's why I said kind of like sub-elite. So my last VO2 max, I was not super trained at the time, but I was like 48 mils per kg.
Yeah, milliliters of oxygen per kg.
Yeah. And that's nothing special. Like the people who do endurance races like are up in the 60s to 80s.
Yeah.
So
I read an article. So I've been more interested in VO2 max recently. I read an article and I was like, it's funny because, having gone through like all of dental school, all of undergrad, you learn from professors, but sometimes you wonder like, where did you get this? Right. And then like, cause really like, what is like the primary source of information? Like if you read the studies, like that's where they're getting their information. And so more and more in recent years, I've just like gone to the actual studies. And I saw a paper one time, when I say paper, I don't mean like a research. I mean, somebody like wrote it on some website, and they were saying, it's common for male athletes to be in the 70 to 80 range. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, it's not at all. And if you look at studies with athletes, like college soccer players, they're often like 55 to 60. Now, sometimes they're higher than that, but these are like lean soccer players in college. And like I said, they're like 55 to 60. So I'm looking at that. I'm like, I don't know where you're getting these numbers. I mean, some elite like cross-country skiers and rowers will be like in like the 70s. But yeah, so I've had mine tested a few times, and I was around, I think I got 49 twice. And then I really wanted to hit 50, which again, like you said, it is nothing special. I mean, I weight train 3 or 4 days a week. I do like 1 HIIT session a week and some low intensity cardio. So I'm in no way like a cardio athlete. and I still have not hit 50. So I was like, oh, it's annoying. I mean, but also, is it worth it for me to train just to hit the number? I don't know. Cause I mean, you probably have better access to it than I do.
Yeah.
When I was studying exercise science in college, I had access to it. Now I have to like see a cardiologist basically if I want to do it. So, I mean, I don't know if somebody came to you and said, hey, I want to, like, just a random person said, hey, I know you run a lab or whatever. Can I test it? How open do you think like a researcher would be to that?
Um, depend. I mean, I've done it for people that I know. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a huge problem. It takes, an hour or something.
Mhm.
We did it for a lot of athletes on like college, the sports teams and stuff.
Yeah.
Just because coaches were like, we need some kind of baseline so that we can post test later and show
Right.
like, hey, you put in work and you improved.
Right.
And so we get a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a pretty miserable test, right?
It's so miserable.
It's the hardest test I've done. I mean, it sucks, especially because I want to say I have an ego, but like I have an athlete's mindset of like, I'm going to push until I literally can't, until like I'm about to fall on this thing or you have to stop it. And yeah, it can be, pretty rough towards the end of it.
We did a couple studies where we would do blood draws during it, like before
Wow.
and during and after. And it's like, so I was not, they were endurance athletes, but I never did it. And I was like, I don't know how you guys are doing this. I'm just like, this is insane.
So where they have like an IV hooked up to it, or?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And you just came up and kind of tapped it and then filled a tube.
Wow. Yeah. That I mean, because it's obviously you already got so many wires and the mask. It's already so hard. To have something in my blood vessels as well would be a little distracting.
Yeah, for sure. But it's a very gold standard test. It's
for sure.
Not terribly hard, and it's good. I feel like most people should know about it at least.
Yeah. So when you were talking, and I know you're just kind of estimating the 10 to 20% reduction in stress, are the studies typically using subjective markers like, the reported feelings of stress, or are they using like cortisol measurements and things like that?
So a little bit of both. I would say there's more evidence in kind of the questionnaires. So the WHO has a quality of life stress questionnaire. There's a couple other like perceived stress questionnaires that are just very like standard, like stuff you can trust. Not like the researchers made up a questionnaire.
Right.
And so most of that is, leaning towards helping reduce stress. And then there's a very physiological decrease in cortisol, which kind of matches the qualitative or quantitative stress reduction, or qualitative, by about 15 to 25%, I'd say. So it's a little bit more, which is, and it's been repeated over like multiple studies. And I'm like, okay, like I'm not a big supplement person and I don't really trust this, but I mean, at one point you say, okay, that's it. Like, yeah, it works.
Do they have any mechanistic data on it yet?
So I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that always concerns me. And the short answer is no. There's no molecular pathway that we could say, hey, it inhibits this and that's how it's working. And I think until we figure that out, I'm always going to be a little bit skeptical.
Yeah. I mean, especially because there's, and I don't know the conflicts of interest in these studies, but I mean, if there's 10 of them, that's a decent amount now. The fact that it does so many things, I'm just kind of like, how is it doing that? And that, is it completely different pathways for each thing? It just seems surprising.
Yeah. And there's even so you're talking all these different tissues too, right? Like it's not just muscle or just like your lungs or your blood, or like it's multiple tissues. So these pathways may be the same in one tissue, but sometimes they do different stuff in different tissues. So yeah, I'm just kind of like a little baffled still. And I will say, I looked into KSM 66. You've probably heard of that brand, right? So that's a big company that does like a lot of purifying, and they probably have one of the seems to be better products, but they've also sponsored a lot of studies, or at least given the supplement, which is not like sponsoring, but it is, hey, here's a supplement.
And what, because I've seen a lot of people mention that brand or that version of it. What are the reported benefits? Like, are they saying that this is the same product but just their brand, or are they saying that it's actually a different product?
So it's only the roots
Okay.
instead of the stems and leaves. So it's stronger, I guess, essentially. I watched so I did a little digging into their company, and they have some videos and some like patent stuff. And I was like, okay, so you stick with the roots, which seem to have more of a benefit or more components that are beneficial. But that's all I could really get from it.
That's one of the things that it's a little makes, the whole supplement world even more confused. I mean, first of all, it's like, does the supplement do anything? Then it's okay, if it does something, does this product actually have it in it at all? Does it have the right amounts in it? And then on top of that, it's like, there's certain like dandelion root versus like the actual, like, I don't even remember, it's like the root, stem, the leaves, like they apparently have different effects. So then if they just say, well, this has 500 milligrams dandelion, well, then it's like, well, of what, And I don't know if that applies to ashwagandha, but I'm just saying you start getting into these things and it's like, maybe you're spending all this money and it's for naught. Maybe some ashwagandha actually really works and we just got the ones that didn't do anything.
Yeah. And it's not regulated either, right? So
right.
You literally have no idea. There can be batch and lot differences. There can be all kinds of small differences that are really important physiologically, but we get the same bottle like from the store, different stores or something, and they're completely different.
Right, for sure.
Even though they say the same thing.
And I think ashwagandha falls into that category of like Ayurvedic medicine, right?
Yes, I cannot pronounce that either. So.
And that's its own world, I guess. I mean, some other thing. Have you heard of Arjuna?
I have, yes.
And that's one that apparently is fairly well studied. Abana, I believe, is a product that has it. I actually know some like pretty intelligent people who are into those supplements. And I've seen, again, studies, but they're supplying the product. It's tough because some of them, it's like, wow, this is really promising. But again, coming from a background of more like medicine where it has to go through like so many trials and approvals, it's hard to really know how much it's really worth it. And again, going back to the fact that it's not regulated, is stuff tainted? I mean, it gets a little iffy.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna slowly make my way through the like adaptogens after seeing what I saw with ashwagandha. I'm like, okay, well, if this has these benefits and maybe it's not the most well studied, if I move on to something else, like you hear a lot about ginseng, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, well, ginseng's way more popular than ashwagandha. So, and I bet there's more studies, whether or not they're the same quality. That's kind of the question. But it's opened my eyes a little bit to explore some of the herbs and things that are not like creatine and caffeine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if for no other reason than like we've got so much of that, at least it's something new,
Yeah.
Can you explain to people what an adaptogen is?
So it is something that helps reduce the stress that you create by doing something else. And that something else could be exercise. It could be the stress of life. I've looked up a few different definitions and they're all like along the same lines, just something that helps you adapt to stress.
So in general, it's always reducing stress from, because I've seen one definition that mentions something along the lines of more just regulating it at like a proper amount rather than just bringing it down. And it's been a while since I looked at the definition of it, but I remember seeing that somewhere.
Yeah. And I think, that could also work. The problem is most people have too much stress, not necessarily like not enough. So the only example I can think of someone having not enough stress is if you're in the gym and you're going to like RPE 5, right? And you haven't changed anything in like 5 years, and you see these people. And so then I'm like, okay, well, they probably need a little more stress.
Right. Yeah, in general, it's not such a big issue. So you're going to look into ginseng. Are you having it at this point?
No, I haven't. I have a long list of things to look into, and I do a lot of like research reviews for different people and different, weightology examine.
Right.
stuff like that. So it's there. It'll get there.
Are there any other supplements that you've kind of been surprised by, where you like it was kind of off your radar, and once you looked into it, you were impressed?
Not yet. I did. So during my postdoc, we did a clinical trial with metformin, which is not like it's FDA regulated, right?
Yeah, right.
And so the hypothesis of that study, that clinical trial, was that it would help older people kind of mitigate or lower the inflammatory pathways with resistance training. Because with older adults, they resistance train, but if you push them too hard, their muscles kind of freak out a little bit and get inflamed, and they don't adapt like younger people.
And you say older adults, roughly
like 65 older.
Yeah.
65 and older. So I really thought that drug was going to like do something for these people, because we had some good pilot data, and then it turned out it didn't do anything. So that was surprising on the opposite.
In regards to inflammation.
Yeah. So inflammation or like muscle size or strength, it really didn't do what we thought it was going to do.
Yeah.
And maybe even like hindered it a little bit.
Really?
Yeah. So
do you think that's through its blood sugar lowering capacity, or?
I think so. It also deals with macrophage and polarization, and so when you kind of, it helps them go from was it M1 to M2s or something like that. It's like deep medicine type stuff. I think it didn't do that, or that didn't matter as much as we thought it would.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Metformin is on a small list of drugs that you see some people talk about in like the longevity space, like different hormones, obviously like HRT, metformin. Some people talk about like rapamycin now. I mean, I'm all for the idea of like trying to like push longevity and finding something. It seems like a lot of these things, like metformin is a great drug, but it's, if you are already healthy and doing the proper things, I haven't seen anything convincing that it's really going to, enhance lifespan or anything like that. And unfortunately, that seems to go for a lot of things. There's some research I've seen on fasting where, if you had a poor diet, it helped. But if you already ate a healthy, nutritious diet, it didn't. So, some of these things might be able to make up for if you're living a crappy lifestyle, but not, I still haven't seen too much that really helps, the core basics that we already know that really add on top of that. And you could say the same thing with training too. It's like, well, maybe a protein supplement helps. If you study even branched chain amino acids, which almost everybody craps on nowadays, if somebody's eating, you had a 200-pound male eating 50 grams of protein per day, I bet he's going to get a benefit from branched chain amino acids. But if he's eating 200 grams of protein a day, he's almost certainly not. And a lot of these things, it's like, unfortunately, I'm just not seeing much to really convince me that we have this next big thing.
Yeah. And it's hard to find those differences too. So as like a researcher, when you're looking for like, all right, so you're doing 90% of the stuff right, and you're looking for like a 2 to 4% benefit.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, to do that study and find that, I've got to have like 20 people or 30 people in a group, and that's hard. And then I've got to make sure I'm doing everything else right, and they're actually following the protocol. So yeah, I mean, most stuff we know, and it hasn't changed much at all in the past 20, 25 years.
Yeah, which is depressing.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I saw an oncologist recently talking about that too, that, a lot of people think that we've just made these like unbelievable strides in cancer treatment. And the reality is like certain types of cancers we have, like a few select ones we've really made, advances in. But for some, we've made like no progress for decades. And it's just kind of like, ugh, really? Don't burst my bubble.
Yeah. So I was doing some COVID testing today, like the test for like positive, negative. And I was thinking, just like reflecting as I was doing it, I was like, they got this vaccine out so fast. This is ridiculous. I wish science always moved at this rate.
Yeah, no, honestly, that's like one of like the things that saddened me about the world is like when you think of how much money goes into things that either that we don't need or it's unfortunate that we need. For example, like obviously we all need militaries because who knows what some other country is going to do. But imagine if we didn't and the billions and billions and billions of dollars could just go into scientific research. Like how amazing that would be, you know?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
it's just the flaw of humanity, I guess, not to get too existential here, but
Right. That's okay.
can you explain to people who maybe don't have any research background when you said, well, in order to determine this like 2 to 4% difference, we need X number of people. Can you just explain why you would need more people to show a smaller difference?
Yeah. So it all kind of boils down to variability between people. And this is one of the reasons we can get away with all kinds of different training protocols and different nutrition practices is if I do something and you do the exact same thing, there's some genetic underlying components and probably things we've done over the past however long we've been alive that cause variability in how we're going to respond to something. And so to tell a difference between, say, we're doing different things now, to tell a difference, I need to make sure it's not that just variability within like measurement. And so what I can do is I can do some stats, so basically a power calculation. And I say, okay, I expect that, let's say Ashwaganda is going to have a small effect size. So 0.2, I think, I don't have a great reference to send you for effect size stuff, but I think lesslikely.com has some stuff. Anyway, you can calculate effect size by comparing the two means and then dividing by the standard deviation. So if you can kind of guess on the effect size, you can plug that in and then figure out how many people you need per group to run your experiment and see that effect size and then statistically be able to tell the difference. Exercise science, and if you've ever heard me on a broadcast, I've probably mentioned this. Exercise science is terrible at having like underpowered studies or
Right.
studies that just aren't quite powered like appropriately. So they'll compare like training protocol A and B and say B is 30% better. Like you're going to get 30% more muscle from B. And it's like, well, like you shouldn't get that much of a difference
Right.
if you're doing stuff right. It's like 1 set versus like 7 sets. You're like,
Right.
Okay. So yeah, that's just kind of the very baseline of how we power studies and what you need. And it can be like the smaller the difference you want to see, the more people you have to have.
Yeah. And probably the last one on supplements. I'm just curious, have you looked into curcumin at all?
No, I have not, and I get asked about that one quite frequently. So that ginseng and curcumin are on my like list.
Yeah, I'd love to see what you find from that, because that is, from what I've seen, pretty extensively studied. I forget the last time I saw it on Examine, but I'm pretty sure there's hundreds of studies on it at this point. And it seems to be, from the ones I've seen, and there's, a lot of different variations now. The last time I checked, it's like I don't know, whatever base curcumin isn't really absorbed that well, but now they have BCM 95. They have one called Mariva, I believe it is, that apparently have much higher absorption. And it seems to show quite an anti-inflammatory effect. That's one of the biggest effects I've seen from it. But again, I'd be interested to see somebody with your background to kind of vet that research and see. Ginseng is not one that I've really looked into, but I mean, I'd certainly be open to it.
Yeah. And that I think ginseng's farther down on my list. Just I don't know why. It's probably one of the better ones, but who knows?
Yeah. So I know you've competed in bodybuilding, right?
Yeah.
How was it? Just the one time?
So three times total. My last season was in 2019, the fall of 2019.
Okay, I didn't realize it was that recently. Okay, so you were doing that then while you got the crazy schedule and doing the research and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Did you find that staying that busy actually helped? I know a lot of people do say that, as far as like not focusing so much on like the constant hunger and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I liked it. Like I like to work, as some people call it. Like It's just having fun. But yeah, I like to stay busy. Hunger does get pretty bad towards the end of prep, and I wasn't like I could have gotten probably 3 to 5 pounds leaner than I
Okay.
did. I was very happy with how I turned out. I was just like, at the end of it, I was like, I got to do life stuff now. And
Yeah.
I'm 147 pounds
Okay.
and,
At about how tall?
5'7" and a
7. Okay.
half, 5'8", somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. It's for me, it's the sleep that really messes with me because I don't know, not a lot like affects me. It's like it takes a lot to like piss me off, for example.
Yeah.
But if I get bad sleep, or even just the idea that I'm going to get bad sleep, like I might feel fine on a day of bad sleep, but just knowing that I got really bad sleep, which is probably something I just need to let go. But as I get hungry, because I always wake up throughout the night because I drink a lot, so I'm up to pee. And then what happens is after that, like first or second time, I can't get back to sleep. So it's very common for me to be up at like 3, and then like that's it. I just don't fall back asleep. And that obviously compounds on itself. You then just get more worn out, you get more fatigued. So that I've never been like what I would call like truly contest lean. I've gotten quite lean, but not to where I'd feel comfortable, like not like striated glutes lean.
Yeah.
And then honestly, I just don't have the desire to do it. I really don't. Like it's I don't see any point for me. Like you competed, so it makes sense. If I was going to step on stage, I'd say, yeah, I want to be as lean as possible, even if in person I look anorexic, which is
Yeah.
often unfortunately how it is. But I do have clients who will say, like, I want to get absolutely peeled. I want to be able to step on stage without stepping on stage. And I mean, look, if that's your goal, that's fine. But to me, I'm like, I feel like nobody wants to do that again. Like if maybe they wanted to do it and then they were like, wow, this actually sucked way more than I thought. And it's funny because like, I don't know if anybody's looked at like happiness research or just like mood and stuff like that. And to most things, people tend to adapt and you get used to your situation. I, at least, and I think a lot of people feel like life was just objectively less enjoyable at like very lean levels of chronic dieting. I don't know if that
Yeah.
was your experience, but
It is. I know. I'll share two stories with you. So I was probably 4 to 6 weeks out, and that's when it starts getting like bad.
mm,
4 to 8 depends on how lean and how fast. But I was sitting in the kitchen, and my wife comes up to me, and she's like talking to me, and I'm eating, and she stops the conversation. She's like, "You're food guarding," and I had like hold my plate like with my elbow away from her and
wow.
like boxing her out. And I'm like, I totally am. Oh my God.
Wow.
So that happened a couple times, but yeah, it's not pleasant. I have to do, or I respond well to cardio.
Mm,
So I was at the end of my prep, I was doing 20,000 steps a day
wow.
plus 4 sessions of like an hour on the bike per week, 4 to 5. I think we
Okay.
did 6 in the last couple weeks, but
Wow.
yeah,
And where
and
were your
like
calories at?
I think like 1,700 or something.
Okay.
So not terrible, but still not much.
Yeah. No, it's not. Were you doing refeeds?
Not the last like 4 to 8 weeks because I was just pushing. I was like,
Okay.
I if I'm gonna make it, we're just gonna have to go.
Yeah. So 1700 isn't absurdly low. I mean, I've definitely heard lower, even from guys a lot bigger than you. So that's actually pretty good. But that is a lot of cardio.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed when I hear these like high step counts because I don't consider myself like lazy, but I guess I just don't move around that much. I mean, I go from patient to patient, and I actually bought, like, I've never had like new technology, but I actually did buy the Apple Watch, and just because I felt like, okay, I'm actually curious. I mean, that was the only reason I got it, but I knew the step count would be accurate rather than having my phone like with me half the day that doesn't catch everything. So even like, I'm just going to check right now. So I had a fairly busy day with patients, but I didn't do any intentional cardio. So I'm at 3166 steps today. That's it. And that is honestly like, if I don't do cardio, I'm probably in the 3 or 4,000 step range. But then sometimes I'll do cardio, and an hour of at walking would be, I find about 1,000 per 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
to be doing 20,000, I mean, I don't know if you're just like walking everywhere or
Yeah. Walking everywhere, doing like 3 1-hour walks a day. Yeah.
wow.
Like it was pretty insane. And it was warm that it was like, summer in Alabama. So
Yeah, I mean, literally the most I ever did was 27,000, and that was like I mean, just so much walking. It was so like at the end of the day, it was a beach trip, and then we actually went to another beach, and we were going boardwalk all day, and I was like exhausted. So for these people who are doing 20,000, and you were in contest prep and doing, I mean, that's, kudos to you for pushing through that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good experience. It'll be a while before I compete again. Let's just say that. 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. My weird story from this last cut was, and it's funny because obviously it's both, you're looking at intensity and duration, right? So how steep is the deficit and how long were you doing it? Most people can have a pretty steep deficit for a short period of time. I foolishly just wanted to be done this recent cut. And so after like 5 months of dieting and losing like 20 pounds, it was like a pretty gradual pace. I said, I just want to be done. And I experimented with 1,000 calories for 2 weeks. Now, I say every time I tell the story, I say, I do not recommend it. I do not recommend it. I was purely experimenting. And I actually gained weight, which obviously I was in a serious deficit, but I think the stress response was just making me hold the crazy amount of water. So not only was it horrible, I mean, it was just awful to do that, but towards the end, I started thinking about like, now I'm going to be able to get refeeds and eat normally. And yeah, I think it's very common for when you're that dieted down to think about food, of course. And I was for a lot of the prep, but this was the first time where I actually felt, and this again, 5 months of dieting, and then this like absurd 2 weeks of like starvation. I actually felt almost like manic, which I've never experienced before. But I found myself like giddy at the idea of like that I'm going to be able to eat more. And like it was weird. Like I actually like 10 minutes later, I was like I was able to step back and be like, what the hell was that? Like it was like irrationally happy about the idea of food. And still, I look back on that situation, I was like, that was very odd. And because I never been that crash dieted before. So it just kind of underscored to me how much something like that can change your psychology, and really affect your brain and the way you think when you're like that starved and dieted down.
Yeah. And I mean, I've fought like food focus every prep, like on the back end of it takes me like 6 to 7 months to get back to normal.
Wow, that's quite a long
Yeah, I
time.
mean, yeah, and again, I'm getting pretty lean, but I'm
Yeah.
not like I don't quite have striated glutes. I'm like right on the edge.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
What
hard.
is your weight or your rate of weight regain after a contest?
Okay, so let's see. I could do percentages, but it's probably easier if I just do like pounds.
Mhm.
So I was about 147 on stage, and then when I try to tell most people, and what I like to do is you need to gain some fat back, right? Especially if you've lost, like if you're lean, like you just need fat on your body because it does things to help your health. So 5 to 7 pounds that first like week. So it's pretty good push, but then after that, it's very much slower. So
Mhm.
it's a pound or two per week ish until you get back to where you're comfortable and you're not food focused and where everything's somewhat normal.
Yeah.
But of course, if you only lose like 10 pounds in a prep, then that's not going to be the way to go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so what's your like typical off-season weight? Like, what do you sit around normally?
So I'm like 174 right now. So I usually drop between 25 and 30 pounds in
Okay.
a prep. So it's pretty solid.
And would you say you're like reasonably lean right now? I mean, it's obviously hard to tell just looking at you, but
Yeah. I'm like, this is probably like if you want to say like set point, I'm probably
okay.
right where I'm comfortable. Like I can see abs and I feel good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I just find that, I try to stay leaner, and I can stay leaner than I used to for sure. It's not like terribly hard for me to stay what I would call like beach lean.
yeah.
But definitely, I mean, there's a point where like I just don't think I would necessarily ever adapt. I mean, I don't think that like an exact set point is there, but I do think there's a level where it's like you're never going to feel quite normal doing it.
Yeah. And I find that a lot of people want to be like that lean, right? And it's like, yeah, I've talked to probably a dozen or 2 dozen clients off the edge where I'm like, hey, like you can't be that lean because you just can't like function normally.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But you could get lean for your photo shoot or your competition or whatever. but just naturally we can't walk around that lean. It's just not good for you. But, you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Well, I also feel like unless you are pretty genetically blessed or you're enhanced, it almost doesn't even benefit you. Or like I guess if you have like a huge social media following, because like for me, for example, like yeah, the pictures I post look better and better when I'm leaner, of course. But like my actual size in person, I easily get more compliments from men and women when I'm bulked up. Like not like fat, but if
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sitting, I sit around like a acceptable, I'll say like 205. I'm probably best at about 195 and I get quite lean below 185.
yeah.
I get way more compliments when I'm bulking up because I wear clothes 99% of the time.
That's
So
right.
that's how you're going to see me. And so not only is it just how I feel, but I mean, really, like, unless you are like, I would probably have to have, I don't know, another 20 pounds of muscle to look reasonably built while like shredded, like while like peeled, because honestly, to be completely peeled, I'd have to be in the 170s, like easily.
Yeah,
So and at 6'1", that's not a big guy, it's just not. So
yeah.
I think some people have unrealistic expectations as far as like what a life being lean all the time is even going to be.
Yeah, and again, for social media, you kind of understand, but then for the average person, like who goes to work and does stuff, you're like, well, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not super great to be
Right.
lean.
Right. So, speaking of like the clients and dieting down, I know, I guess it's somebody you had worked with and you had talked to me about trying this program. If you want to kind of delve into that, I know I said I was going to get into it, and then these last weeks have been insane. So I haven't done it as much as I said I was going to, but
Yeah, yeah, no, that's totally fine. Um, so one of the students I was mentoring developed a machine learning algorithm, and it helps you kind of find your maintenance calories, and then from there you could either choose to bulk or cut, or you know we have we've developed ranges within like speed at which you want to bulk or speed at which you want to cut, with recommendations and stuff based on a lot of the writing I've done. But he has, it's this super sweet program. So it's called Log Smarter, and it's based on a doubly labeled water set, which is like the gold standard for energy expenditure. Most equations are based on basal metabolic rate. So that's just like you laying there with a mask on, and it measures your CO2 output. And then you tell the researchers how much you move, which is not that great.
yeah.
So the doubly labeled water, you drink it, and then you basically pee in a cup, and they measure it, and they can tell how much energy you've expended over a certain amount of time. And so he had this like 800 person data set, which is insane. Like most researchers cannot get the data that he had. So it's built on this really nice foundation, and like the people within the data set are all shapes and sizes. So you have good background. Um, but I think just the way he's built out the program is so easy to follow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you plug in your calories and it adjusts your calories each day, and then you have a range too, right? Because if I give you a calorie like a special number, you might get too focused on hitting it.
Right.
And all of these energy expenditure estimations, they have error rates, right? So it has like a 5% error rate. So you'll see like a calorie range. Like as long as you're in this, you'll be good to go. And then as you lose weight, right? If you're losing weight too fast to what you wanted to do, it'll adjust and say, no, 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 increase your calories by like 50 or something.
Mm.
But yeah, it's just this really, really cool machine learning algorithm that I'm super excited about it. I've been using it, and it figured out my maintenance calories in about 10 days. So it's about
Okay.
2,400,
Nice.
give or take.
And would you say, so something I was recently talking with another coach friend of mine is, that program sounds great. And I think like probably especially because it's adaptable, what I find, and I would wonder if it would overcorrect early on. So I will sometimes cut calories more aggressively at the start because your body kind of has that like buffer range where it can maintain, and then you're going to lose a bunch of water. And so it might say, well, you're losing too fast. There's some weight changes that aren't due to actual mass changes.
Yeah. And so it adapts almost every day. So it would catch that, like say the first week you lost like 5 pounds, right? It would probably pull your calories back up for a day or two and realize that like that was your new baseline. And then put you back into the bracket of, hey, this is not actually within our goal. Because we take a rolling average instead of like most coaches do 7 days and then you'll get an average at the bottom.
Yeah.
So ours is the last 7 days, like just rolling. So
That's
that's
great.
kind of how to deal with that. So you hinted at metabolic adaptation. It's definitely a thing too. So I'm still trying to figure out how to work that in, but there's not really enough data to do that like realistically, scientifically.
Okay. But wouldn't it also, unless I'm misunderstanding, wouldn't it kind of factor that in if like you are metabolically adapting and then you would not be losing weight at a calorie level that you should? Would it then look at that and say, well, you're not achieving the goal and then bring the calories down?
It would, yeah. I always try to get a little too sciencey sometimes with it.
Okay.
And I'm like, we can optimize this better. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
Plus my fascination with metabolic adaptation. So
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
So will we be able to have like a link for that for people who are interested when it?
Yeah. We're working on an app now because apps are everything.
Right.
The website is just logsmarter.net. But I'll shoot you a link and stuff so you have it.
Awesome. Well, dude, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know we both got to go eat. So where can people find more of your stuff?
Most of my stuff's on Instagram now. So it's BRob21. Pretty easy to find. Facebook, I'm Facebook, just Brandon Roberts. And I guess if anybody listening has any questions or anything, feel free to shoot me a DM or whatever. I answer them pretty regularly. So I like to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
All right. Take care.